What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So as we continue our discussion on DC Rebirth, we are going to step back for a second and we're going to run over the Rebirth issue of Red Hood and the Outlaws. And again, I realize I'm a little behind here, but the idea is to basically play catch up and to run over these various Rebirth issues for the sake of simply just having them, so that when we come along to the individual character story arcs later on down the line, we don't have to go back and retell the Rebirth issues. We can literally just reference them for videos that people can watch later on. But what's really ironic about this is that this is called Red Hood and the Outlaws, but it really just focuses on Red Hood. And that makes sense. You know, of course, Red Hood and the Outlaws, or I guess the Outlaws concept, was a New 52 idea launched by Scott Lobdell. And it was basically a way to give Red Hood his own sort of team, to give him a group of individuals who were, for all intents and purposes, anti-heroes, and then have them act out their various adventures accordingly. Of course, Red Hood and the Outlaws was written by Scott Lobdell, and so it's good to see him return to the Red Hood title. Now, for those of you guys who don't really know much about JasoN Todd, the beauty of this Rebirth issue is that because Rebirth as a whole is a way to blend what worked with the New 52 with what worked in the pre-New 52, this is really just taking Red Hood as we knew him before the New 52 and just kicking off from there. It's almost as if Scott Lobdell is basically eliminating everything from the New 52 with regards to the Outlaws, and that's kind of the cool thing here, is it's basically just sort of a refresh. It's not really a reboot so much as a let's wipe the slate clean with aspects of JasoN Todd's character and let's go forward from there. And so this is kind of like a take two for the Outlaws idea. And again, you know, because of the fact that this was designed to be a jumping off point for a lot of new readers, Scott Lobdell basically refreshes us with the idea of JasoN Todd. Now, for those of you guys who are well versed in his history, bear with me for a second, because again, I know there are a lot of people out there who are not. When it came to the idea of JasoN Todd, he has a long running history in Batman, but he's really the result of fans killing him. That's the best way to put it. You know, when Dick Grayson first appeared in DC Comics, he changed comic books forever. Dick Grayson introduced the idea of teenagers fighting alongside superheroes, the sidekick. And because of this, it actually tripled Batman's sales. In fact, assuming you could find the data for it online, which there are locations where you can go and find the information, Dick Grayson's introduction resulted in one issue of Detective Comics prior to his introduction running, you know, run-of-the-mill, doing a standard sales release in terms of publications. And then after Dick Grayson, the publications tripled. So you could actually measure how successful Dick Grayson was for the Batman franchise. But because of the fact that Dick Grayson had grown so popular, and because sidekicks had become such a huge thing in the realm of not just DC, but by, you know, Timely and Atlas, which would become Marvel at this point in time, it resulted in sidekicks being everywhere. And so DC said, okay, well, let's give them their own team. And they launched the Teen Titans. The result was that for a time, you saw Dick Grayson walking both the line of Batman, or I guess Batman sidekick, as well as being on Teen Titans. But eventually he left the side of Batman and was Teen Titans in its entirety. And the result was that Bruce Wayne went back to being his own solo superhero. The problem with this was that the fruit had been tasted. You know, people liked the idea of Batman having a sidekick because it grounded him. It took Bruce Wayne away from being just this guy that went and fought vigilantes to now he's got to look after a sidekick, and it gave him a reason to sometimes run away from a fight. Not because he wanted to, but because it was in the best interest of his sidekick. It also gave us the Rainbow Batman suit, and of course that's never a bad thing. And so what the introduction of JasoN Todd did in the events before Crisis on Infinite Earths and following Crisis on Infinite Earths is it saw the second sidekick of Batman being introduced. The issue with this was that when JasoN Todd first showed up pre-Crisis, his origin story was identical to Dick Grayson, and fans hated that. Fans said, this is ridiculous. Dick Grayson has his own origin story. If you're going to introduce a second sidekick, give him his own story. And so following Crisis on Infinite Earths, JasoN Todd got his own origin story, but the damage had been done. You know, in the eyes of fans, JasoN Todd was a cheap attempt to replicate Dick Grayson, and they didn't want to have anything to do with him. And so DC effectively killed off JasoN Todd at the request of fans, and they did so by having the Joker murder him. Now again, we basically get a lot of this stuff over the course of the opening issue, and Scott Lobdell pays special attention to the idea, to the relationship between JasoN Todd and Bruce Wayne, in the sense that JasoN Todd, in the eyes of Bruce, was a kid who was lost. He was a kid that was falling down the rabbit hole of crime and would eventually most likely get himself killed because of what he was doing. The fact that he was actually jacking the wheels off off the Batmobile, which takes some balls, to be honest. It takes balls to leave the Batmobile on cinder blocks, but the fact remains here. What an awesome thing to do. What an awesome idea. But the fact remains here that, with Bruce Wayne taking JasoN Todd under his wing, he became the second Robin. And what was interesting about his character, at least, to my mind anyway, was that JasoN Todd was much darker. He wasn't really like Damian Wayne dark. He was a great blend between how ruthless Damian Wayne is and the nature of Dick Grayson in terms of being almost identical to Batman. And so because of this, there were times where it was alluded to, and it was even shown on a couple of occasions, that JasoN Todd let people die, whether it was dropping them to their deaths or else killing them outright. He was shown to be a very brutal character in a lot of different aspects. Now, ultimately, when it came to his death, it really changed everything. It changed the entirety of how Batman saw sidekicks, because now it was the fact that it wasn't just enough to keep them safe, he had to keep them out of harm's way. And for a time, he didn't want any sidekicks. And he even gave the cold shoulder to Dick Grayson. And, Scott Lobdell focuses on a lot of this. Now, the other half of this is that Scott Lobdell focuses on the here and now. Scott Lobdell focuses on the moment, because again, all the Rebirth issues are designed to not only give us a refresher of who the characters are and what direction they're going to go in, but they're also designed to set the stage for the coming story arcs. And so for Red Hood and the Outlaws, this is basically just setting the stage for the character, or for what direction we're going to see JasoN Todd going in. But again, what this does is it shows us that, in the midst of, I guess, Gotham City at the moment, that JasoN Todd seems to be hunting down the mayor of Gotham. And this is done in a way to where it's almost as if we get bits and pieces. In truth, not much happens in this story. It's quite literally JasoN Todd just tracking down the mayor, and then Batman shows up. And Batman, and JasoN Todd begin to get into a fight with one another. But it's also Scott Lobdell showing us what JasoN Todd is capable of. Is he on the same level as Dick Grayson in terms of fighting prowess? No. Is he on the same level as Damian Wayne? Not at all. Does that mean that he is a weak character? No, it doesn't, because he even says it himself. What he has now is experience under his belt. Because he spent time fighting alongside Batman, he knows what Batman is about. Now again, because Scott Lobdell is telling us what's happening in the present moment with Red Hood, while simultaneously telling us his backstory, he also shows us that when DC decided to kill off, or I guess when the fan base decided to kill off JasoN Todd, when he was effectively beat to death by the Joker, or I guess when he was beat by the Joker and left to die in an explosion, it resulted in him being taken to the Lazarus pits of Ra's al Ghul and being resurrected. Following that, of course, we saw the story Under the Red Hood. I think it was called Under the Red Hood, which led into him returning to Gotham City enigmatically. No one really knew who he was, cutting a swath through the criminal underworld in an attempt to find and kill the Joker. Now, of course, that is a beautifully written story, and I may cover it for Classic DC Day, because Under the Red Hood is like the definitive Red Hood story when it comes to JasoN Todd. I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who would say that there's a better story than that. It was pretty damn good. But we also, again, get a little bit of exposition here, a little bit of explanation, in the sense that, JasoN Todd, after presumably shooting the mayor, is contacted by what appears to be a member of Black Mask. Now, Black Mask isn't really he's not like the Red Skull. They seem similar in appearance, but they're completely different. Black Mask is really more of a guy who runs a criminal empire, but he doesn't really operate on a global scale like Red Skull does. Instead, Black Mask actually just wears a mask to keep his face hidden, but the idea is to operate from the shadows. The idea is to never really be caught with his hand in the cookie jar, which is similar to Red Skull, but he also has his own agents carrying out his own will. But because of the fact that he operates with the notion of the False Face Society, which are basically people whose identities cannot be verified by way of people, looking at them, not being able to see their faces, Red Hood is brought into the fold, or at least asked to join the fold. Now, we learn that the reason behind this is because, again, he's very much pursuing the criminal underworld, and while Batman initially tries to talk him out of it, he says the only way to really do this is to go underground and to become part of the criminal empire. The way to become part of the criminal empire is to engage in activities with very seedy individuals. But for Bruce Wayne, he doesn't want to see this happen, because he knows how easy it can be to reach that point of no return, that all it takes is one false step, all it takes is one bad move. In truth, if we wanted to reference the Joker, we could say all it takes is one bad day, but it results in the fact that the character of JasoN Todd would end up crossing a line that he can't come back from. And so again, he says, you have to trust me on this. You have to trust me on this idea that I know what I'm doing. You have to trust me on the fact that yes, I'm going to be doing some seedy things. Yes, I'm going to be fighting alongside some seedy people, but in the end, it's all for the greater good, and I promise you, I will not fall to the wayside. Now, this is kind of an ironic statement by both JasoN Todd and Batman, because with JasoN Todd initially making his appearance and seeming as though he was a vigilante, seeming as though he was out to basically take over Gotham City, it's very ironic that then he would come back and say, I'm essentially going to be doing the the exact same thing, but I'm not. For Bruce Wayne, though, it's also the recognition that while he has engaged in some relatively bad activities, and while, of course, Dick Grayson was a spy at one point in time, and even now is operating, or I guess, prior to the events of Better Than Batman, was operating as part of the Parliament of Owls, which was the global version of the Court of Owls from Snyder's run of Batman, that even Bruce Wayne himself recognized how easy it was to fall. And so again, it's really not necessarily that Bruce Wayne is trying to get in the way of JasoN Todd, so much as it is that he's trying to make sure that he doesn't end up tumbling down this rabbit hole of self-destruction. And so it makes for a pretty compelling case when it comes to the relationship between the two because of the fact that it is so unique. I mean, following the death of JasoN Todd and his resurrection, the relationship between the two was just never the same. It was never the way it had been before. It was one of the few relationships that Batman had with his Robins where it had stretched to the point whereby there was no measure of reconciliation. There was no possibility of things going back to the way they used to be. With the other Robins, and even with Batgirl, it can to a degree. They look at him, they respect him, especially after the events of Death of the Family when it came to Snyder's run and Joker's assault on the entire Bat family. There was still some measure of reconciliation there. But for JasoN Todd, that's not a possibility. For JasoN Todd, that's never gonna happen. So anyway, guys, I know this was kind of a weird explanation. It's not usually like the ones that we normally do, but that's because of the fact that we're literally referencing a character that DC is sort of removing the New 52 landscape from and focusing almost entirely on the pre-New 52 concept and then just sort of going from there. But it's also because of the fact that I felt like in a video like this, when we're talking about, a DC Rebirth issue of such a pivotal character from DC's landscape, I felt like it was more important to really focus on the past of JasoN Todd, where he came from, why he's significant, why fans love him so much, as opposed to focusing on this very moment. Of course, you will have been able to see everything that was happening in the present day, but the fact remains here that I think this is really more of setting the stage and showing us, or reminding us as readers, what JasoN Todd is about, so that we can go forward into the existing story arc with Red Hood and the Outlaws, knowing what's going on. So anyway, guys, if you guys are, if you're new here to Comics Explained, be sure to hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Core. If you guys like this video, make sure you drop a like and leave a comment down below, because I'm kind of curious of all the Robins that exist, and I'm really gonna ruffle some feathers with this question. With all the Robins that have existed, Carrie Kelly, Stephanie Brown, Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, JasoN Todd, Damian Wayne, which one do you guys prefer the most? Which one do you guys think is the best? Because I'm curious, to see that's a good question. Which Robin is the best Robin all around? Combat skills, detective skills, the whole 9 yards. Which one do you guys think is the best? And I will catch you all later. Peace.